What's up, everyone? Welcome to this How to Support guide. Today I'm going to be going through how to play support in Conquest. This is going to be for those players who either want to play support, want to get into it, or let's say you're trying to call your role and you don't get it, and so you're stuck with support. This is going to be a video for you. So I'm going to go through different phases of the game. I'll go through the laning phase, also starting builds, how to do camps, talking about lane pressure. I also want to go into team fights and how to position, also when to rotate and how to rotate. So as we go in through the gameplay, I'm going to show you how I start off with most of my builds. So Watcher's Gift is actually a starter item you're going to want to get on almost every single support. The extra gold and farm that you get off of this item is very key. Mark of the Vanguard unfortunately just doesn't give you enough compared to this item, so you always want to get Watcher's Gift. As far as relics go, it really depends. A lot of people will go meditations for that early sustain, especially if you have a hunter who has a lot of wastes of mana in their abilities. Some people pick up meditation. I pick up curse in this match for a couple reasons. So we're laning against Amir and AMC, who are two very slow gods with no escapes. That means that curse is going to be very, very helpful for when you're trying to aggress on them and get that early kill or any type of kill in like a team fight. The other reason is because Fafnir's ultimate syncs very well with Curse. If you use your Curse first before you ult, there's just a better chance that they're going to be sitting in your AoE when the damage starts to tick. So that's kind of why I picked that relic up in this situation. Starting with the camps at level 1, unfortunately on her does not clear camps correctly. Of course what you want to do is the ADC usually starts the back harpies, then when you're at the damage camp the mid laner will leash the mid camp, bring it back towards the end of the circle, and then that's when you as a support will tank it. The mid laner will then go to the back harpies, finish killing those with the ADC, and then both of them will come back to the damage camp and help you as you're tanking it. After that, you want to go very quickly to the boars, try to leash them towards the edge so you can get to lane a little bit earlier. We do very well here. We do get to lane about the same time as Amir and Almuz and Cab, which is great because they have awesome clear. And that's one thing to think about, of course, once you get into lane. Think about who you're matching up against. Does the support have good clear, and does the ADC have good clear? Because that can dictate whether or not you're going to have pressure. And of course, pressure is very, very important in the early game. It may mean winning or losing a match. So we're playing against a team that should outpressure us by all means, and they kind of do in the first couple of minutes. They do outpressure us, but it's amazing how when you're laning early, how much zoning can affect whether you have pressure. So let's say you're playing as a Kumba or an Ares or a Bacchus, characters who don't have the best clear in the world. You can still use zoning techniques to kind of push them back. One thing that I do a lot, and you may not be able to see it too well in this example, but I try to stay on the same side of the lane where the ADC is standing. If the enemy ADC sees me standing in front of them, they're expecting me to CC them at some point, which means they might stand a little bit farther back, and that also means that they may not be able to clear the lane as efficiently. So that's a good strategy I use. Also, try to move back and forth just to kind of confuse them. If you're standing in tower and the enemy team has all of the pressure, don't do anything stupid. I can't really stress that enough. Do not aggress on a dumb play, especially if all of their abilities are up, because that could mean an early kill for them, and then almost automatically you're going to lose lane because of that. So that's kind of important. If you're in tower, just farm up as much as you can, play it safe, and then slowly, maybe once one of them's going to go back to base eventually, that's when you can kind of look to go aggressive again. If you do get that early pressure and you're pushing them into the tower, that's when you really need to start looking for invades. So look to invade their boars, their red buff. Rotate to mid when you feel comfortable. If you really are focusing on farm, let's say you are a really bad early game support like Kumba, he does not have a great early game. You may want to farm a little bit more before rotating to mid. And also use discretion. If let's say the mid lane is doing really badly, they're getting pressured by the enemy jungler, you can also look to rotate because of that. So it's up to you. Earliest rotations to mid can be like 3 minutes. Latest rotations can be up to like 7, 8, maybe even up to 10 minutes if you really are focused on farm. So that really depends on how you're playing. Again, as far as types of supports, you know, you really, I think in the meta right now, you really want to look for those aggressive supports. They're kind of in Terra, Athena, Fafnir, Bacchus. They're all pretty aggressive because they can go in there with a dash or a leap, and they can gank people a lot easier than like a Sylvanas. So you really have to think about aggression levels because that early pressure really can make a huge difference. Now, as far as builds go, I can go into that a little bit for as far as early builds. Now, Hide of the Urchin is an item that you're going to always want to have in your back pocket. I don't build it in this game because we do get a pretty good lead in this game. The tier dominates the the Herc. The Bastet also gets some really good early kills. I don't think Onher has a kill yet, but he will get one pretty soon. As you can see, I think about backing here because no one's around. This is pretty common, but make sure you're calling as a support. It's really both of your jobs, the ADC and the support, to call enemy missing, but make sure you're doing it. Another thing that I do here, this is a tactic that I do very often. I go into the jungle just a little bit to make it look like I'm going to gank mid, and then I kind of come back. It's just a deception tool to use, mainly to make the enemy team think that they have a 2v1 scenario when really I'm right there waiting for them. It's very simple kind of technique to use. Just make it look like you're going to rotate and then don't really do it. It's very good for getting your ADC an early kill. It's also very good to do at level 5. So on her, like, just got his ultimates, very good idea to kind of make it look like you're going to gank and then don't. There's a scary moment here with Thoth, but I think we make it out just okay. I don't want to talk about too much about Fafnir's abilities because I want to make this general for all kind of support plays. But of course, make sure when your XP camps come back, you're going to those right away. Try to invade the enemy teams whenever you can, and then once you start getting into the mid game stage of the stage of the game, that's when you want to start looking towards really focusing on mid lane and solo lane. Once you leave dual lane, you kind of want to forget about it because the enemy ADCs will probably box each other a little bit. If your ADC gets soloed, maybe think about rotating back there. But you really want to start looking towards grouping up with the mid laner and the jungler. Having that group of three is huge for ganks. A three-man gank is way better than a one-man or two-man gank. You can really confirm kills by doing that. Another thing is you want to try to out-rotate the other support if you can. This may depend on whether you have a lead or not. As you can see, Amir is out-rotating me to soul lane, but I'm right on him, making sure that I keep track of him, and that's what you really want to do. Let's say if the enemy support is out-rotating you because they have a lead, make sure to A, call it, and B, try to follow them as much as you can. A support on the run is very, very scary, very dangerous for ganks because of that high CC. If they come mid and an Amir freezes you, and let's say they have again, they have a Thoth in their team, an Amir freeze and a Thoth ult, your mid laner is going to be dead. So you really need to call it. Make sure you're warding. Um, a common misconception is that if you're in the dual lane, that it's the support's duty by themselves to ward. That's not true. ADCs should always be warding. In fact, their first back, ADCs should be buying 2 wards. But as support, every single back you need to be buying wards. Um, as far as what kind of wards to build, you can on your first back buy sentry wards, and then after that, you probably want to buy at least 1 sentry ward. If you're buying 2, that's fine. Sentry ward and a regular ward, that's fine. But you really want to start getting sentries pretty early in the game on your second back. That kind of makes sense. Um, Now, once you start getting into team fights, objective fights, we can talk about positioning a little bit. One thing I want to talk about is techniques for using your kits and then trying to stay in fights. A lot of times, what I'll see people do when they play support is they'll jump in, they'll initiate. They know that that's their job to initiate in fights because they're the tank and they have that great initiation ultimate or something like that. And then they use up all their kits and they think, well, that's it, I'm done, and they run away. That's really, really bad because what you're doing is you're giving your team the impression that you're going to frontline for them, and then by running away right away, you're putting them in an immense danger. So make sure, even if your entire kit is down, to stay in that team fight. Um, a reason why people might do that, let's say they're a jungler. That's what junglers do. They go in, they use their kit, and they get out. That's not support. Support, you go in, keep auto attacking people. If you're not auto attacking, even though there's no reason why you shouldn't be unless you're disarmed. Um, keep body blocking for people, using your peel. You're supposed to be in the front. That's your job. So make sure you do that. Make sure you're making calls. Now, in general, as a support, I do like to make the calls. It just makes sense because, especially if let's say you're sieging a tower or sieging a phoenix, you want to make sure the team understands that you're going to be tanking it. Um, if someone else makes the call, they say attack left lane, and then let's say you do something else instead. All of a sudden, your jungler is taking a tower and they're dead. You don't want that. So it makes a lot of sense for the support to make the calls, but only if you're comfortable with it and if you feel like you know what calls to make when. Um, so I think coming up in a little bit, we have I do die here, but coming up we're gonna start looking at the Gold Fury. Now this is something that you can do. You can do a 5 minute Gold Fury if you want. It may be even 15 minutes before you get to the Gold Fury. It really depends on how team fights are going. But when you're thinking about going to the Gold Fury as a support, you really want to do it when in two situations. Either you've killed two or three people on their team, that's pretty safe, or if you know that their entire team is on another part of the map, or let's say someone's split pushing and you know that the other team members are in base. You really want to make sure you know what you're doing. Have the Gold Fury warded as early as possible when you're playing support, and also make sure when you're attacking it that once it's about half health, you want to start roaming around a little bit just to look for different alleyways and stuff that enemies might come to try to steal it. That's pretty important as a support. You are on zoning duty, and really you're on zoning duty for most of the game. That's what your kits are made for when you're playing support. You're not there to do damage. Don't chase kills as support, even though you're the frontliner. You're the one who's going to be steering the ship, deciding who to go for. You should be calling out targets, of course, if you can. Um, if you're not on comms, that becomes difficult, and you may have to just spam attack and then go for a specific target. But let's say you're playing against an AMC, and that's kind of the number one target anyways. You may just want to focus them, and that's okay. As you can see in this game, we kind of stay in the mid lane for a good amount of it. I think the reason because of that is we are kind of dominating this team, and they think, well, we have to group up. We might as well just all group up in mid lane, and that ends up costing them because if they had someone who was on split pushing duty, they might have gotten some more towers off of us. But yeah, they don't really play this too well, unfortunately. But this is good, hopefully, for mechanically to just give you an idea of what to do. So coming into the late game of this match, of course, we have a pretty good lead, so we're doing well. But I do want to talk about taking care of your team and really taking that lead role and making the calls. This is pretty important, especially when you start thinking about doing Fire Giant, to have that one person who's making calls. Because any kind of split in your team fights, and you're going to start making mistakes because of the high damaging ADCs and the mages and all these different characters who are doing so much damage into the late game. Really, if one person gets out of position, if you're not peeling for the right person, there are going to be misplays and there's going to be some bad kills. So positioning is important. It is also key when you're doing any kind of team fighting to engage, disengage, and then re-engage, and kind of play this little, it's like a chess match. Go in as a support, do what you need to do as you're peeling, and then the next person will absolutely follow you. It's very natural for someone else to follow because their abilities might be, they might be back from cooldown or something like that, and so it's really something you have to go. Disengagement in late game team fights is very, very important, and it can make a huge difference between a scrub player and a really good player, knowing when to disengage and then how to re-engage. So this is actually a very good example right here. Tyr does not know how to disengage in this fight. We're going to go through how he messes up and what he should have done. Now, I call over and over again in this team fight right there, be careful, retreat, okay, what are you doing? And I'm backing up, I'm not even helping him. He's like calling out for help, but I keep saying retreat because I see that Thoth is coming over. I see that their entire team is here. He dashes into them, he runs into the wall, and he's dead. So plays like that, this is not just supports anymore. I'm not talking just supports. Look at that play right there as tier, and if you're one of those players who finds themselves in positions like that and say, "Where's my team? What's going on?" Maybe the problem was that you didn't look to your surroundings. You didn't see that Thoth was coming. The ward, in that top left there, it was pinging, and I could see that. So, and I'm not saying that I had more awareness than Tyr in that situation. Maybe he saw they were coming and just thought he could solo them because he was so big. But that's kind of something you have to think about late game. Another thing that people do is they get fed early and they think that they're invincible, and then all of a sudden late game, let's say that they're like 11-2, and then they think they're these unstoppable forces. But what if you're a shock? What if you're this character with a really great early game, and then late game you're playing the same way? And so I think a lot of people maybe don't take that into account. Of course, I'm talking about kind of lower ranked to casual play. Better players will recognize these kind of mistakes, but I think it's something that, again, I just want everyone to keep in mind when they think about playing Conquest. Learning how to disengage in those late team fights is very, very important. Also, making sure, again, that one person is making calls. Right here, I call for the Phoenix because we just decided them. It's a pretty easy call to make, and I think most people expected that call to happen. But I did see some people start to back up, almost as if, well, we get the tier 2, maybe we can just back up and do something else. No, push that Phoenix, siege it right away. That's important. Right here, Tyr makes an excellent call for Fire Giant, which is really good. I was actually thinking about pushing left tower instead, but I think Fire Giant was a fair call. We get it here, and it works out. Once again, as you see, once the Fire Giant's about half health or so, I start to walk back, and I just do some zoning duty. This is very important to make sure that that steal doesn't happen. Of course, someone could come from behind the Fire Giant pit to steal it, but that doesn't happen here. So always be on zoning duty as support. That's kind of your job in the late game. Um, and then again, making sure you're grouped up. And split pushing is okay, but there is a certain stage in the late game where you need to stop split pushing. If you're a jungler, if you're an ADC, I don't care if you're Bastet, I don't care if you're out Loki, I don't care if you're out Kwang. You need to stop split pushing at a certain point in the late game because you're gonna get picked off. It's pretty much guaranteed. Now, when I say at a certain point, I mean way later in the game. You can still split push late game. It's fine, just as long as you have a ward and you're safe and you know what you're doing. But really, you want to stay together. Another thing that happens is team fights will stagnate and they'll kind of go back and forth. So let's say two people die, and then three people left. They go into a bad team fight, and they die, and then the two people who were dead before they come back and they find themselves in a bad situation. So you kind of go back and forth from these groups of 3 and 2 people who just keep feeding, and you're never able to actually group up as 5 teammates and get a good team fight going. Also, if you're behind in Conquest, don't go into fights late game unless you have to. Don't go out looking for fights. And that a lot of that responsibility lays on the support. If you have a support who's being too aggressive, let's say that they haven't been killed once, but the rest of their team is feeding, they might try to make a call to jump into a fight that isn't good. And that's just something to think about. So that's the end of the match. Of course, it's not the longest match ever. I thought it'd be good to kind of show again some positioning. Hopefully you got a good idea of the early, mid to late game stages of being a support. If there's anyone out there who has any questions, maybe they have different builds. I didn't go into the late game build too much because it does vary. I think quickly we can talk about some items that you might want to think about. Magi's Blessing is something that I use. Spear Robe, Mantle of Discord is something that I use quite often in the late builds. Getting those aura items, the Sovereignty Hardware Amulet, are two very, very strong items. And let's say you're ahead, you can maybe start going into Breastplate of Valor for the cooldown, or like Void Stones, whatever you feel like. So, there's a lot of options out there as far as builds go. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this guide, and that if you're listening to this, you're going to go out and try some of the techniques, play support a little bit more. And if you do, I hope that these have helped you. So, thanks so much for watching and listening, and I hope you have a great day.